I'm Wendy.
Standing in the middle of the church party, the air thick with tension, I watched as my mother, Helen, her face as cold as ice, stood up and declared that the exposure of our family's business was inappropriate. It was as if a dam had burst, and all the pent-up emotions and secrets were flooding out. This was the climax of a chain of events that had begun weeks ago, events that would forever change my perception of family. A month ago, I was just an ordinary nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, working long shifts and trying to make ends meet. I'd had a minor accident on my bike while commuting. It was nothing serious at first, just a scraped knee. Being a nurse, I cleaned it up and bandaged it, thinking it would heal on its own. Little did I know that this small wound would turn into a life-threatening situation. A few days later, I woke up in excruciating pain. My left leg was red, swollen, and a thin red line was creeping up towards my knee. I knew immediately what it was: cellulitis, a potentially dangerous infection that could lead to sepsis if not treated promptly. I called my coworker, Lily, who urged me to get to the hospital right away. At the hospital, Dr. Carter was straightforward. The infection was aggressive, and I needed surgery within 48 to 72 hours. Otherwise, there was a real risk of losing my leg. When I asked about the cost, my heart sank. The surgery, with all the necessary treatments, would cost around $15,000. And because I had switched jobs a few weeks ago for better pay and hours, my new insurance hadn't fully kicked in yet. It would only cover about $5,000, leaving me with a gap of $10,000. I had $4,800 in savings, which I had been saving to pay off my student loans. The hospital said they could work on a payment plan, but they needed a significant portion up front before scheduling the surgery. With a heavy heart, I reached out to my family. My family was different. My father, Henry, was a successful businessman who was always focused on status and money. My mother, Helen, had once been kind-hearted, but over the years, she had adopted my father's materialistic views. My sister, Sarah, was getting engaged, and my parents were more concerned about impressing her fiancé's wealthy family. I called my mother first. She picked up the phone from a high-end spa. When I explained my situation, she brushed it off, saying I always cause drama. She mentioned that Sarah's engagement party was coming up and that I should try to attend. When I pleaded that I might lose my leg, she told me to rely on my insurance and that my father handled the finances. When I asked her to talk to him, she said he was busy looking at a luxury yacht for Sarah's engagement gift. The next day, I gathered the courage to call my father. He answered the phone as if he was in the middle of a business deal. When I told him about the surgery, he said he had just spent $45,000 on a yacht for Sarah. He said that investing in her future with a wealthy family was more important than my surgery. He called me a poor investment and told me to figure it out on my own. He said that a little struggle would build character. That evening, my sister called. Instead of offering support, she asked if I was coming to her engagement party. When I said I might lose my leg, she laughed and said I'd manage. She was more worried about the final head count for the party and told me not to embarrass her by showing up in anything less than formal attire. I was alone in the hospital, with no one to turn to. The clock was ticking, and I had less than 31 hours until the surgery deadline. I had only $4,800, and I needed $10,000. Just when I was on the verge of losing hope, my 75-year-old grandmother, Rose, walked into the room. Grandma Rose had always been the kind soul in the family. She had a small farm and lived a simple life. She sat down beside me, took my hand, and asked if it hurt. I broke down in tears. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope with $800. She told me she had sold her late husband's antique farming tools, the only precious thing she had left of him. I was in shock. She said that her husband, my grandfather, would have wanted to help me. She also told me that my mother hadn't always been like this. She changed after marrying my father and getting caught up in the world of wealth and status. The next day, I received a call from Pastor John from the local community church. He said he had heard about my situation from a friend of Grandma Rose. The church community decided to organize a collection to help me. Strangers were coming together to support me, while my own family was out shopping for a luxury yacht. Pastor John also asked if he should tell my parents the truth and encourage them to help. I thought long and hard about it. For years, I had been the peacemaker in the family, covering up their mistakes and pretending everything was okay. But now, lying in this hospital bed, facing the loss of my leg, I realized I couldn't do it anymore. I told Pastor John to tell the truth. I was done protecting them. 24 hours later, with the $6,200 raised by the church, Grandma Rose's $800 and my $4,800 in savings, I had enough for the upfront cost of the surgery. The surgery was successful, and I woke up with my legs still attached. After the surgery, I went to stay at Grandma Rose's farm for recovery. One day, my mother called Grandma, furious because someone at her country club had mentioned my surgery. She blamed Grandma for making her look bad. A few weeks later, it was time for Sarah's engagement party. I wasn't officially invited because of my unreliable condition. I stayed at Grandma's and watched old movies while my family celebrated without me. Then, Grandma's 70th birthday was approaching. The church community wanted to throw her a party and also thought of inviting my parents and sister, hoping for some family healing. I was hesitant at first, but then I realized that Grandma deserved to be surrounded by people who loved her. I agreed to help organize the party. 3 days before the party, I found a box in Grandma's attic. Inside was a receipt for the sale of the antique farming tools and a letter she had written to my grandfather. Reading the letter, I learned how she felt about my mother's change and her determination to help me. Just then, I noticed a text on her phone from my mother, threatening Grandma not to embarrass the family at the party. On the day of the party, when it was revealed that Grandma had sold the precious tools to help me and the church community had bought them back as a gift, my mother couldn't hold back her anger. She stood up and tried to shut down the whole event, saying it was a private family matter. That's when I stood up. I told my mother there was no misunderstanding. I recounted how I had asked for help and been denied. I said that from then on, I would decide who my family was. Family, to me, were the people who showed up like Grandma, the church community, and Uncle Tom, my father's younger brother who had also shown support. My mother and father were shocked. My sister, Sarah, looked uncomfortable, and her fiancé, Mark, seemed to be re-evaluating the situation. Mark even apologized to me and said he was sorry for what I had gone through. After the party, Uncle Tom called to tell me that Mark had postponed the wedding. He said they needed to work out how Sarah's family treated people. Sarah called me, crying and angry, blaming me for ruining her wedding. I told her that the consequences were not revenge, but the result of the truth coming out. A few weeks later, my mother came to Grandma's house. She wanted me to tell people there was a misunderstanding and that they had offered to help. I refused, telling her I needed distance and boundaries. I wanted to live my life without being hurt by the people who were supposed to love me. 6 months later, my leg had fully healed, leaving a small, fading scar. I had been promoted at work, and I was living with Grandma Rose. My relationship with Sarah was slowly improving. We would text each other occasionally, simple messages like, "How are you?" My parents kept their distance, but I no longer felt the same pain. One day, a patient's daughter approached me at the hospital, saying she was going through a similar situation with her family. I told her to stop waiting for her family to be who she needed and to find people who already were. Looking back on this whole experience, I've learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who stand by you in your darkest times. Setting boundaries isn't a betrayal. It's a way to protect yourself and find true happiness.